For the third consecutive year, Hungary is the most corrupt member state of the European Union. According to Transparency International's 2024 Corruption Perceptions Index, Hungary ranks last in the EU and has slipped to 82nd place globally among the 180 countries assessed. Systemic corruption, permeating the country from the judiciary to the enforcement system, is not only measurable in numbers, it destroys people's homes and livelihoods. This film, through the story of a victim, illustrates how justice has become a commodity for sale in Hungary, against the backdrop of the Wolna, Sardal case and the Miskolc housing mafia. In the 2000s, tens of thousands believed in the promise of foreign currency loans, low interest rates, a new home. Banks offered Swiss franc-based loans en masse because their interest rates were lower than those of forint-based loans. In 2008, due to the economic crisis and the collapse of the forint's exchange rate, the monthly repayments for CHF loans increased by as much as 100%. According to the Hungarian Central Statistical Office, by 2010 the number of households with foreign currency loans exceeded 1.2 million, with the proportion of non-performing loans reaching 20% by 2015. The number of evictions has dramatically increased. Between 2010 and 2015, 40,000 properties were auctioned off annually, often for a fraction of their real value. Bailiffs and their colluding networks exploited loopholes in the system. Properties burdened with defaulted loans were auctioned off at absurdly low prices, frequently to their own associates. At the end of 2021, one of Hungary's most severe corruption scandals erupted, the Wolna, Sardal case. György Sardal, president of the Bailiffs' Chamber, and Paul Volner, deputy minister of justice, built a corrupt network. Sardal paid 83 million forints in bribes to secure Volner's influence, enabling him to appoint bailiffs and manipulate state tenders. Wiretaps revealed Sardal even attempted to have judges removed if they stood in his way. The scandal implicated 22 individuals and called into question the independence of Hungary's judiciary. Our film was made in May 2025, while the Wolna, Sardal case is still ongoing. György Sardal has been placed under controversial house arrest, while Paul Volner remains free to defend himself. But a corrupt justice system leaves its mark not only in courtrooms, its flaws plunge vulnerable families into despair. In Miskolc, the housing mafia runs rampant. Bailiffs and auction buyers use illegal methods, forged documents, and violence to strip the needy of their homes. The story of Ferenc Darab and his family is a shocking example of this cruel reality. A family that lost everything but continues to fight for justice. Ferenc Darab and his family spent decades building their home in Miskolc at 7 Fekska Street. They currently travel to England for work to cover their expenses. The house was owned by their son, Deans János Darab, but Ferenc and his wife lived there. It was their only refuge, where the mother was also officially registered. In 2009, Deans took out a Swiss franc-based loan from AXA Bank. But after the loan defaulted, he lost the lawsuit against the bank. This case's outcome now aligns with a series of irregularities. On April 30, 2025, the Court of Justice of the European Union issued a landmark ruling. It obliges Hungarian courts to declare foreign currency loan contracts null and void, as they violate EU law. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, let's see what happened. On August 9, 2016, the property was auctioned off for a mere 20 million forints. The buyer was Dr. Norbert O., a Miskolc resident, who, according to allegations, acquired properties through collusion with bailiffs and official authorities. A court ruling was also issued against him for multiple counts of fraud, document forgery, harassment, and other crimes. The court found him guilty and sentenced him to 2 years in prison, suspended for 4 years. This happened despite the fact that a previous suspended court ruling was already in effect against him. This shocking verdict further demonstrates how deeply rooted corruption is in Miskolc. Authorities and courts there often turn a blind eye to the actions of the housing mafia. The auction took place in Kazink, but it was irregular from the start. The original bailiff failed to prepare an auction record, which is mandatory under the law to ensure transparency. Ferenc Darab claims this on video footage as well. Shortly after the auction, this bailiff passed away, and the case was taken over by Istvan Kovacs, who later issued the missing record, also illegal, as the document should have been prepared at the time of the auction. On November 2, 2017, the bailiff issued a new document, a so-called auction record, stating that the auction was successful and that Dr. Norbert O. officially purchased the house. The purchase price was to be paid within 60 days. According to the law, if an auction takes place, the buyer must pay the full purchase price within 60 days. If they fail to do so, the auction must be declared unsuccessful, and the buyer loses the deposit paid in advance. In such cases, the bailiff must announce a new auction, and the buyer loses their deposit. The payment cannot be accepted years later, as the law does not allow for this. Norbert O. did not pay on time, only much later in November 2017, meaning the auction was invalid, despite the bailiff accepting it, which was also irregular. Moreover, the bailiff failed to send the official auction documents in time, so the Darab family could not object within the deadline. The series of irregularities ultimately led to the family's home being transferred to Norbert O. ownership. Meanwhile, on August 10, 2016, the Kazink District Court suspended the foreclosure, so the property should not have been transferred to Norbert O. possession until the court made a final decision. 3 years later, on June 10, 17, 19, and July 22, 2020. During the COVID pandemic, Norbert O. and his associates broke into the house without any prior notice, committing trespass even though the property had not yet been officially transferred. Meanwhile, the family was in England. The neighbors reported that they climbed over the fence, broke the padlock, drilled out the back door lock, stole a circular saw and tools from the yard, cut down trees in the garden, and stole the radio from Ferenc's VW LT28 van. They then towed the vehicle to a parking lot in Miskolc and left it unlocked. On June 19, 2020, at 2:24 p.m., an unknown man appeared at the house. He was around 60 years old and had a catfish-style mustache. At that time, the family was at home. The man climbed over the fence and tried to break the newly installed padlock.
Jó napot, mi áradban? Nincsen mit kicserélni magának itt. Ott úr nem küldheti ide magát. Nem. Akkor sem küldheti magát ide. És miért törte szét a lakatot? Miért nyitotta ki a kaput? Most. Miért törte szét? Miért van ott a létra? Miért mászott be a kerítésen? Ne tegyen semmilyen kilincset sehova.
Naturally, they filed a report with the police. On June 17th, the police responded in one instance but refused to conduct an on-site inspection of the house, only examining the car in the Miskolc parking lot. As a result, the family also filed a complaint against the police, but the police rejected it. Deans, whose name was on the property, was a ballet dancer at the Opera House at the time. In 2020, he met Justice Minister Judith Varga in front of the Opera Ballet School, where her son also attended, and during that season, the Justice Minister served as the cultural patron of the Opera House. Deans told Judith Varga that the Miskolc police were not helping and that they could not achieve any legal recourse. Varga advised him to file a complaint in writing. Deans did so, and the complaint was officially forwarded from the Ministry of Justice to the Ministry of Interior, then to the Budapest Police Headquarters, and from there back to the Miskolc Police Department due to jurisdiction, where it was rejected without investigation. With this, the circle was complete. Then came the period when they scheduled the first possession transfer date for September 14, 2020. 2 weeks prior, the auction buyer, Norbert O., gifted the house to his mother before the possession transfer. This was reversed within a day or two, likely because someone pointed out that this was illegal and constituted a criminal act. In September 2020, Ferenc Darab and his wife, Erzsébet Gonci, returned home from England after attending her class reunion. The police imposed a mandatory home quarantine on them starting September 12th, set to end on September 22nd. On September 14th, the bailiff, István Kovács, attempted to transfer possession of the house to the auction buyer, Norbert O., but this was thwarted due to the quarantine.
Ezért, amit éppen zajlik.
Önbíráskodni akarta Oroszul.
És mai napra tisztelt ennek az ingatlanak a birtokbeadását. De mivel ugye járványügyi lejárással a járványügyében pártkirakot egy ilyet. De és magája a ház? Ha tulajdonlag szerint nem oldja neki, akkor meg maguk kitakarodnak.
A bíróság hoz nekem papírt, hogy innen önöket rakják ki, csak mindegy hova, önöket ki fogom rakni.
On the next occasion, October 28th, Ferenc Darab returned to Hungary alone, as his wife remained in England. The Airport Police Directorate imposed a 10-day mandatory home quarantine on him, set to end on November 6th. The following day, October 29th, the bailiff reappeared with Norbert O. to transfer possession of the house, but this attempt failed again due to the quarantine. Mr. Darab was registered in the quarantine system, and the police monitored compliance through an application. On November 1st, at 1 p.m. on a Sunday afternoon, shortly before the end of the quarantine, they unexpectedly showed up to test Mr. Darab and his wife. However, his wife was not even in Hungary at the time. Mr. Darab refused the test, saying he had not requested it and that it should be given to someone who needed it more. He emphasized that he did not feel ill. The quarantine was not ordered due to illness, but because he had traveled from abroad. It was mandated by the Airport Police Directorate. On November 4th at 9 a.m., Mr. Darab complied with the check conducted via the app. That afternoon, however, Norbert O. men began appearing around the house, people who had been lingering in the street since the summer of 2020. In small groups with rotating members keeping the family under surveillance. Mr. Darab and his wife reported almost daily to the police that they felt harassed and under psychological pressure. Yet the authorities continued to take no action against the harassers, deepening the family's helplessness in the face of the Miskolc housing mafia's tactics. On the morning of November 4, 2020, Ferenc Darab spoke by phone with their family doctor, Dr. Monica Kondorak. She pointed out that the district chief medical officer, Dr. Mariana Marchi, had instructed her to order a COVID-19 PCR test. The test was for both Mr. Darab and his wife. This was despite the fact that his wife was in England. The authorities were fully aware of this.
A tegnapi napon akartak engem tesztelni, és én nem tudom, hogy milyen okból és miért, mert én nem jeleztem a doktornőnek, hogy bármilyen problémánk lenne.
Igen, engem keresett meg az ANTS-nek a nagyfőnöke, hogy azonnal rendeljek tesztet, mert már nem tudom, hanyadik hete karanténban van az épület, hogy ott valami nagy góc lehet.
At this point, Mr. Darab grew suspicious at the peak of the COVID pandemic, when even prominent people couldn't get tested immediately due to the overburdened healthcare system. Why were they being prioritized for testing?
The website of the National Public Health Center states that testing is not mandatory.
He believed the goal was to seize their home. In the afternoon, shortly after 1 p.m., he called Dr. Mariana Marchi by phone. He called her to hold her accountable as the county chief medical officer for ordering the testing. At that time, he was not yet aware that Dr. Mariana Marchi also intended to lift the official home quarantine. To his surprise, he was told that the matter had become moot. Mr. Darab was allegedly no longer under quarantine as of midnight that day, despite the fact that at 9 a.m. the quarantine system's app still checked on him. All of this happened without any testing being conducted. Lifting the quarantine and manipulating the quarantine system required the active cooperation of the police. That afternoon, a police officer actively participating in the eviction checked Mr. Darab's identity at the house and photographed his ID card. This photo likely served as the basis for removing him from the quarantine system, as such a photo is required for both registration and removal from the system. At the same time, paramedics arrived at the scene and called the police to force Mr. Darab to undergo testing. The officer stated that they could compel him to do so, even by force. He threatened to take Mr. Darab away in handcuffs if necessary. Mr. Darab, however, resisted. He said he was very curious to see how they would try to do it. Ultimately, they did not handcuff him, but the irregularity of lifting the quarantine made it clear that the authorities were determined to carry out the eviction at all costs. The police and paramedics eventually backed off from forcing the test, but the situation did not end there. The police patrol on the scene called Dr. Mariana Marchi, head of the Public Health Department of the Miskolc District Office, by phone. A female police officer returned to Mr. Darab and informed him of the good and bad news. The good news was that he did not have to undergo testing. The bad news was that they would impose a 3 million forint fine on him, despite the fact that refusing the test does not carry a penalty, as the law states no one can be forced to take it. Ferenc Darab continued to refuse the test, and his wife could not have been tested either, as she was abroad. On November 4, 2020, the day of the eviction, Dr. Mariana Marchi took action. She is the head of the Public Health Department of the Miskolc District Office. She unilaterally lifted Ferenc Darab's mandatory home quarantine. She also lifted the quarantine of his wife, who was not even in the country. The goal was clearly to get the house. What else? Someone behind the scenes influenced Dr. Mariana Marchi, head of the Public Health Department of the Miskolc District Office. The goal was to use the test as a pretext to evict them before the quarantine period ended. Mr. Darab spoke with a member of the operational staff, who clearly stated that the chief medical officer had neither the authority nor the ability to order the test or lift the quarantine, as such actions required written notification, and Mr. Darab would have had the right to seek legal recourse. The irregularity was clear. The quarantine was lifted without written notification, disregarding legal procedures, to ensure the eviction was carried out at all costs. An SMS message arrived stating that the mandatory home quarantine would be lifted that day, but this only indicated the intent to lift it, not that it had actually been done. Just a few minutes later, at 4:41 p.m., the bailiff, Istvan Kovacs, and the auction buyer, Norbert O., appeared alongside the police, as if they knew exactly, down to the minute, when to arrive. Kovacs already knew on October 29th that November 4th was designated as the possession transfer date, as the quarantine would be lifted at 4:38 p.m. Despite Mr. Darab's protests, the police broke into the house. This happened in the presence of Istvan Kovacs and Norbert O.
Élő közvetítésbe megy a Facebookra. Nem fogom kinyitni az ajtót, hatósági házi karanténba vagyok.
Uram, jöjjön ki.
Abba vagyok. Nem megyek ki sehova senkivel.
Határozat van arról.
Nincsen határozat, nálam van a határozat, hogy hatósági házi karanténban vagyok. Nem lehet felülírni. Nem lehet felülírni, a törvény erejénél fogva nem lehet felülírni. Hiába van itt.
Nincs
Karantén kötelezettség van, és ön ezt nem írja fölül. Nem nyitom ki az ajtót. Nem nyitom ki az ajtót. Nem nyitom ki az ajtót. Ránk törik a házat. A rendőr eltűnt. Nincs itt a rendőr. Mit képzel? Hol a rendőr? Hol a rendőr? Nincs birtokba adva. Nem nyitom ki. De nincsen birtokba adva, és nincsen időpontja sincs. De most nem adhatja. Nem nyitom ki. A rendőrt kérem, hogy védjen meg. Nincsen birtokbadási időpontja. Nincs. Nem küldte ki sehova.
They did this despite the fact that the 10-day mandatory quarantine was officially supposed to end only on November 6th. This provides further evidence of the Miskolc housing mafia's unlawful methods.
Karanténban vagyok itt, és védelmet kérek erre. Karanténban vagyok, és ellenőrzött a rendszer is.
Sászor Dániel rendőrőrsről és az orvosi rendőrösről.
Én pedig Darab Ferenc vagyok.
Meg szeretném kérni, hogy hagyja el az ingatlan.
Nem tudom elhagyni az ingatlant, mert nincsen semmilyen indok ennek.
Ne videózzam, mert én sem videózom magát.
Ezt nem tilthatja meg nekem a saját lakásunkba.
Ma 0 óra 1 perctől ezen az ingatlanon nincs hatósági karantén.
De van, mert engem ellenőriztek többször is a HKR rendszerben.
Most akkor elmondom ezt is.
Igen, legyen szíves.
Lett ellenőrizve, viszont ezt körülbelül egy órával ezelőtt a tisztifőorvos visszavonta.
A tisztifőorvos nem vonhatja vissza.
Visszavonhatja, ebben ne veszünk már össze.
De veszünk össze, mert nem vonhatja vissza. A rendőrség által kiállított hatósági házi karantén, amit a repülőtéren kiállítottak, az miért nem érvényes?
Ez az országos tisztifőorvos, illetve a megyei tisztifőorvos is felülírhatja.
Felülírhatja.
Így van.
Hát ez nagyon érdekes kérdés. Nem írhatja fölül, még csak nem is ő rendeli el, hanem a törvény erejénél fogva repülőtérre rendeli el a hatóság.
Ön innen ki fogják vezetni. A legszükségesebb holmikat vegye magához. Személyigazolványa, telefontöltő, bármi.
Nézzék, ez valami, nem tudom, ezt egyszerűen nem értem, hogy ezt Magyarországon meg tudják. Jó.
Azt szeretném kérni, nyugodtan tehet feljelentést ezzel. Azt szeretném kérni, hogy a legszükségesebb holmiait vegye magához. Jó? És az ingatlan most hagyja el, kérem. Későbbiekben pedig lesz alkalma arra, hogy az itt maradt dolgokat, gondolom el. Most ez nem erről szól. Annyi kérésem van, most ezt az ingatlan önnek elból, ez itt most lezárásra kerül. Kérem, hogy most ezt az ingatlan hagyja el. Ha gondolja, beleírom, hogy kifogással kíván élni az intézkedés ellen, de ez nem fogja meggátolni ezt az intézkedést most. Így van, a rendőri intézkedéssel szemben is panasszal élhet. 30 napja van rá, amit megtehet a független panasztestületnél vagy rendőrkapitányságon. Viszont ez az intézkedés most végbe fog menni. Itt csak az a kérdés, hogy ön magától fog kimenni, vagy testi kényszert kell alkalmazni.
Ugye? Nem kellene ezt elszállítsák valahova?
Nem köteles.
Nem köteles?
Azt is van, felelős öltés tekintetében a helyszínen hagyja.
Helyszínen hagyja, és nem készít leltárt. Ugye, hogy mi marad be?
Levideózott mindent. Mindent, ön is levideózott mindent. Nem is minden.
És önnek nem kötelessége ezt leltárba venni, ami itt van? Azért, mert ön a bírósági végrehajtás. És azért, mert önnek is van ebben felelősség, hogy itt minden rendben megmarad.
Azt írtam a jegyzőkönyvbe, az árverési vevőt, az ingatlanban maradó ingóságokért 60 napos felelős őrzésre.
És mi az az ingóságok, amiért?
Ami minden, ami itt marad.
De mi az a minden? Hát most, hogyha holnap azt mondja, hogy csak... de ezt önnek leltárba kell venni.
Mind a kettő darabon most.
Önnek leltárba kell venni.
Ezt honnan veszed?
Mert ezt a bírólatási törvény ki kell mondani.
Most szólni kell.
Ki is mondja.
Hol?
Ki is mondja. De ez nem. Önnek, tehát bár minden hiányzik, az hogy tudja felelősen vállalni, hogy itt minden megmarad?
Nem én.
De ön foganastősíti ezt a...
Azért mondom, ez le lesz zárva ez az ingatlan. 60 napig, de nem jön be senki.
Igen?
Senki.
Amikor betörtek, széttörtek minden ajtót, minden?
Hát majd erről gondoskodik az árverési vevő, hogy ez le legyen zárva.
Hogy ez le legyen
zárva. Lesz egy jövő, senki nem fog így bejönni.
Aha.
Egyéb, amit hozzá kívánunk,
ezt, hogy a leltárt vegyék föl. Ez a hozzáfűzni való. Hogy vegye föl, legyen szíves a leltárt.
István, 2 órát kidobok mindent az utcán. Amit akar. Oda kiboszom neki az út közepére, ha ezt akarja.
Én nem ezt akarom, felvette a leltárt.
Föl leltárt felesít. A mingó leltárt nem készült, az ingatlanban található mingóságokról fénykép felvétel készült. Aláírja?
Én ezt nem írom.
Jó, semmi gond, nem kívánja leírni.
És ott belevette, ugye, hogy a jegyzőkönyvben, hogy én kértem, hogy készüljön ingó leltár.
Nem, azt
az, hogy én kértem.
Fearing Darab bitterly remarked, "This is Miskolc, a special city." The on-duty police officer revealed to him that evening that over 28 foreclosures had been carried out on those 2 days, clearly demonstrating the ruthless operations of the Miskolc housing mafia. According to Mr. Darab, Dr. Mariana Marchi, head of the Public Health Department of the Miskolc District Office, must explain why she irregularly lifted the quarantine and on what legal basis she acted. Although no one directly accuses her of a crime, Mr. Darab sees no other explanation. Was it money, a cozy relationship with the police, or some other power interest that overrode the law? In this eviction case, the family home was owned by their son. He was not present, nor could he have been. Due to the quarantine obligation during the COVID period, only Mr. Darab could be there. Others who were not originally present were not allowed to stay in the house. His son couldn't even visit as a guest while the quarantine was in effect. This eviction was carried out through collusion and was not lawful. Since his son was not present, and no legal representative was there either, only the bailiff, accompanied by the police, should have entered the property. The police should have sealed it for 60 days. This did not happen. Instead, the house was immediately handed over and looted. Everything they owned inside the house has not been recovered since. Some items were placed in the yard, such as the sofa, which got soaked, and their books were put in bags, among other things. They filed a complaint. A compensation lawsuit is also ongoing to recover the remaining belongings or their value. The case began on November 4, 2020, with their eviction. They filed a lawsuit against the chief medical officer involved, the family doctor, and other participants. The court hearings are ongoing. The first hearing that goes beyond the preliminary phase and proceeds as an actual trial is now approaching. This is the compensation lawsuit for damages against the family doctor. Against Norbert O., they have filed a compensation lawsuit for the stolen, looted, and withheld belongings, furniture, and everything else. The cases are still ongoing, and even after 5 preliminary hearings, no progress has been made, further deepening the difficulties of the family's struggle for justice. The story of Ferenc Darab and his family painfully highlights a systemic issue. In Miskolc, corruption is deeply rooted. The housing mafia, collaborating with numerous participants, bailiffs, police, and public officials, works to strip defaulted borrowers of their properties. They acquire these properties at absurdly low prices. The authorities' inaction, irregular procedures, and disregard for the law all demonstrate that the system stands not on the side of justice but on the side of profit-making. However, there is good news for foreign currency borrowers, and for Ferenc Darab's family as well. On April 30, 2025, the Court of Justice of the European Union issued a precedent-setting ruling. It declared that foreign currency loan contracts containing unfair terms are null and void. In such cases, the borrower is only obligated to repay the amount originally borrowed. The previous practice of Hungarian courts, upholding these contracts by converting them into forint, was found to be incorrect. For those whose properties were auctioned due to the bank's unfair conduct, as in this case, compensation is automatically due. This ruling may give new hope to Mr. Darab and the thousands of victims of foreign currency loans, offering a chance to find a just resolution and reclaim what the Miskolc housing mafia took from them.
So, in other words, it's as if nothing ever happened. According to this ruling, these contracts are invalid.
These contracts were already considered invalid by the Hungarian Curia back in 2013. However, there was a deal between the Hungarian Curia, the banking association, and the government. They agreed to substitute the missing buying and selling exchange rates with the rate of the Hungarian National Bank. The purpose of this was to keep the exchange rate risk in the contracts. This allowed lenders to collect claims from consumers up to 10 times the original amount. This has always been prohibited. It concerns several million contracts. The scale is in the range of 3 million.
These are shocking numbers. That's why it's interesting to ask, what should anyone do now who had such a loan? Can they now file a lawsuit based on this ruling? Can they demand to get all their money back, or to have the contract declared null and void? Or should the government be the one to centrally initiate action toward the banks, saying, look, here's this court decision. So how should this work in practice?
This should have automatically been followed by various institutions of the Hungarian state. To my knowledge, no one has taken any action so far. This morning, I sent an official letter to the governor of the Hungarian National Bank, requesting that he enforce the ruling of the European Court. He should act as the financial supervisory authority against commercial banks and other financial institutions. He should prohibit them from continuing their current practices. Practically speaking, banks and other lenders should suspend and withdraw from enforcement proceedings. They should allow consumers to enforce their rights, whether through litigation or, preferably, through out-of-court settlements with the banks. According to the ruling, consumers should only owe the original loan amount in forints that they actually borrowed, nothing more. It is very complicated for consumers to hire a lawyer and assert their rights in individual lawsuits, because over the past 10 years, the Hungarian state has practically made it nearly impossible for the legal profession to operate. Those lawyers who previously provided legal assistance to consumers have given up this fight as they found it hopeless.
But now this ruling is here. So it is not hopeless at all.
To leave it for 10 years, if I had to suddenly find 10 or 12 lawyers to help me out, I'd be in big trouble.
But can you explain to the viewers why a lawyer is needed for this?
Yes.
I mean,
in
if there's a ruling like this, then to enforce it, someone shouldn't have to travel from the other side of the country to Kossuth Square, for example. If there's a ruling like this, it should just work. Why doesn't it work here?
Because this is not a state governed by the rule of law.